Hello there again, it's your boy Facecam Cole. I was sitting there thinking about the Roy Mustang get back against, envy and lust, but then I sat for a moment and I thought about one of the more interesting dynamics in the show that hits us very early on, being Shou Tucker. Now, I'm assuming anybody that's this far into the video has watched Full Metal Alchemist, and if you haven't, well, spoilers are on the horizon. But I would implore you to either watch Full Metal before watching this video, or watch this video, then watch Full Metal right afterwards. That being said, smash that like button and subscribe, and turn on post notifications. With that being said, let's talk about the thing that was sitting at the front of my mind. And when it comes to Shou Tucker, it's not just the fact that he's a bad father, because I think at his core, he just wanted to be successful. When I was rewatching episode 4 earlier on, because somebody decided that they wanted to post a 2-part series on their TikTok about it, I just sat there and watched it through. But the thing that struck me that really didn't hit me the first time I watched it all those years ago was just how out of it he was and out of touch he was. Obviously, we understood he was a state alchemist. They get their exams every so often, and each year they have to make sure they pass it. If you have poor marks in one year, the next year you have to show out, otherwise you risk losing your license. And when you take into account the fact that he was not licensed before, and they were broke, like dead broke, to the point where him and his wife were arguing constantly, I can understand how he might have snapped inside. Just something that was keeping him down the straight and narrow just popped, and he realized, I can't keep living this way. I have a wife, I have a child. I think his wife just happened to be the person in the moment when he had that original thought of, what if you just cheat the system and use a human to make the Chimera? Obviously, nobody's done this before, legally at least, and it's not on record having been done before. What if I managed to be the first? Obviously, I've worked with Chimeras before, but none of my research has been enough to get me that license, and I need that license because I need the funds to take care of me and mine. And then the wife starts chirping in his ear. They keep getting into it. Obviously, the daughter's the one being subjected to all of this, but she's just a bystander in it all. And so, as the broken man that he was, recognizing that he was at his wit's end, and probably his wife was willing to leave him, he decided to use her and make the Chimera. And as we know in the clips, it says that the Chimera only said one line, I want to die. And therefore, it ended up not eating any food until its own wish was granted. The part that makes it so gut-wrenching in the show is the fact that he literally sits there, welcomes in Edward and his brother into his home with his daughter Nina and the dog, shows them his library, shows him the lab where all his chimeras currently are all locked up, but obviously none of them speak coherent English or anything of the sort. Otherwise, he wouldn't need to use his daughter in the experiments. And they go through and they have a lovely time. They chat with Nina, they have a ball. The dog keeps harassing Edward, and it was just the funniest thing ever. Alphonse is using his back as a slide because he's just so huge in that suit of armor. And they come back. And the thing that made it different was the fact of when the original soldier came to go get Edward and Alphonse, he reminds Shou Tucker, hey, that inspection's coming up. And that puts the seed in our minds. We're like, what's an inspection? Obviously, the daughter doesn't understand what the inspection is. So he sits there and he explains it to the daughter. And he's talking about it with Edward and Alphonse, obviously, at the table in the room. And then he looks at his daughter when she sits there and says that her and the dog will growl at them and they'll be forced to give him the certification. And in that moment, the idea dawns on him. And I believe that deep in his mind, it had always been present. But he kind of didn't want to return back to that. Obviously, he used his wife, and probably the arguments, like I said, that they had led to him using her in the experiments. And he was just like, okay, I just need to keep the license and keep working and find another workaround instead of using humans. Then I can keep my license. It'll justify why I used my wife in the process.
Really, nigga?
And my daughter will be able to live a lovely life. And I'll be a acclaimed and well-to-do state alchemist. But he couldn't. And then that's when that chip, that little mental process just snapped inside of him. Care anymore. Like Vegeta said, I didn't care anymore. He didn't care about being just a state alchemist. He knew he had to make sure he kept the licensure. So he said, would you guys like to play with Daddy tomorrow?
Meow.
Daddy, chill.
Bruh.
And of course she was excited because he never has time to. He's always working. He's always trying to find it out. And to his credit, though he was failing, he was legitimately trying. It wasn't like he was just BS and lounging around all the time. And he's like, oh yeah, let me use the next person up. And one could make the argument he could have just kidnapped somebody and used them. Would have been more difficult, but could have did it still the same. But in his head, it was probably just like the closest thing to him and the ease of access of having his daughter there. And obviously the dog, her and the dog were borderline inseparable. And now they are quite literally inseparable. So he goes through and he runs the process, obviously. And we find ourselves in a world where he decided to go through with the test. Edward and Alphonse come in and the lights are out inside the building. They're looking for him. They go in there. They see him sitting with the dog. They're ecstatic. They don't even recognize the resemblance. That was the craziest part. They see the dog literally almost the exact same size and everything as the original dog, but with different eyes and literally brown long hair on it. Created a chimera. I did it again. Guys, look, check it out. This is Edward, and that was his fatal mistake. Granted, I think that the chimera would have ultimately probably said something that tipped him off afterwards, but the fact that he sat there and pointed out Edward under the assumption that the memories wouldn't be there anymore was his fatal flaw. And obviously, they have their whole spiel. Edward sits there for a second, asks him when his wife ran away 2 years ago, asked him when he first got his licensure 2 years ago. And just because he was hoping he was wrong, he said, "Where are Mina and the dog?" And that's the point where like the Looney Tunes, like the looniness in the doctor's head just went crazy, because he just gives him that sneer and he's like, "Darn brat figured it out already." And it's like, dude, this is Full Metal. Like, yes, he's a kid and yes, he's goofy and everything, but the whole reason we know him as Full Metal and we know him to have a higher level of maturity despite his goofiness is because he literally tried transmutation to bring back his mother. So the IQ of him and his brother are on a different level than the average kid that you would run into, the average teenager you would run into. Heck, probably even the average adult. He can literally transmute things without a circle. Without a transmutation circle, he could still do things. So what in your brain would tell you, yeah, I can pass this by him? That was a terrible idea. And then I got frustrated. Like, that was the part that made me say, you're just a terrible person. Like, you should not exist anymore during my first watch. Because it's the sneer of like, I know I did this, but he wasn't supposed to catch on. And we see ourselves later on and he's broken. Because obviously, Edward puts him up against the wall and starts hounding him. And rightfully so. It needed to happen. And Shou Tucker sits there and says, "We're the same because you did it first. You tried it on your mother all those years ago. I just did this later on, and we were both messing with human transmutation. We shouldn't have done it, but it was against the rules, and we still did it. You're no different from me." And Edward snaps, and he hails on him. And Alphonse, still being the calm, collected younger brother, eventually comes in, grabs his arm, and says, "No, you'll kill him." Me personally, if you ended him right there, wouldn't have been mad. But then you have Mina, dog, hybrid, chimera walk over, says, "Edward, no." And if I was Edward in that situation, I would have been so frustrated. I wouldn't even know what to do with myself. But again, he stops. Shou Tucker slumps to the floor, and Alphonse sits there and tries to comfort the dog, but apologizes because despite all their abilities, despite literally being able to transmute things without a transmutation circle, using alchemy with no circle, all their abilities, and they couldn't separate them once they've been connected. The law of equivalent exchange took something that could never be returned. And obviously, as they're sitting there preparing to go through the system of checks and balances, he takes out the watch. He's looking at it, and he's like, "Yes, I've maintained it. I did it. I can keep my state license." And he's holding it in his hand. And Edward sees him, and he's just so disgusted with him. He's like, "Do you not realize what he did?" And at that point, me and the older version of myself, I realized, is he a bad person? Absolutely. But deep in his mind, he really just wanted to keep the license so he could keep doing what he had been doing. And I think he did care about his daughter. I think he did care about the dog. But I think that when he initially did it the first time, it was at wit's end. The finances weren't financing. His wife didn't care for him. They were going at it, bickering back and forth. It was a terrible environment. And he was at his wit's end. He had no, the common sense that was there was just so small to the point where he just snapped. He said, "I have to do something." And he looked at his wife, who kept nagging him and yelling at him and getting in arguments. And he said, "That's my solution." And so obviously, while it looked like he was perfectly fine after that, he wasn't. There was always something broke. There was always a loose screw in there, and nobody picked up on it until Edward and Alphonse came across mirror number 2. And I'm greatly appreciative because you have obviously Scar come in after the fact when he was locked up with said chimera in the State Alchemist building. And now Scar was wrong because he ended up, obviously sliming out literally every guard that was on the way there. But he walks through and he asks him, "Are you Shou Tucker?" And Shou Tucker, doing his mental gymnastics, realizes, you're not a state alchemist. How did you get in here? What are you about to do to me? Gets up. He's like, "Bro, step off, push off." Scar's not having none of that. You abusing powers, thinking you're above God's will? No. Destruction. Boom. Slimes him out right there. And then you have Mina in her chimera form, comes over, sniffs her dad's hand, and obviously distraught because she can only express but so many emotions. She doesn't really understand how bad the father was. And Scar apologizes to the dog, recognizes and admits there's nothing that can be done for you. So at the very least, I can grant you a release from this realm, and puts down the Chimera. And one thing that I greatly appreciated about Scar, even despite this and his own wrongs, though he does have a little bit of a redemption arc, he's an interesting beast. As he leaves the building, he says a short prayer and wishes well upon their spirits as they are guided onto the afterlife to God. And it closed a loop. It was a loop that was open and then it was closed. And I just really appreciated that. But I said all that to simply say, I think more than Shou Tucker being a terrible dad and being evil, I think he was just a broken man who felt like he reached wit's end 2 years before the show even started. I guess not before the show even started. Before they ended up coming across Chimera number 2, and nobody caught on to the signs. Everybody just thought that he was just a state alchemist. He was just another dude. And that just wasn't the case. He was a broken man trying to keep it together. And when pushed to the limit again and recognizing he was about to lose his licensure and become broke and live the life that he lived before, this time with no wife, he didn't want to do that. So again, Shou Tucker isn't really that bad.
What do you mean by that?
He's terrible, but he really isn't that bad like we felt like he was, or like I felt like he was. And in the conversation of bad anime dads, he's not number 1 to me. After the rewatch, I can't justifiably say that, because it would be different if he chose alchemy and said, this is the only thing that matters, and was always just a terrible person to me, to his daughter and his wife as a result. Then I would just say, oh, he's just a bad person. But once the mental health comes into it and you really have to focus on that. And back when Full Metal dropped, I want to say 2007 to 2009, somewhere in that range, it wasn't really a big conversation. So it was a lot more popular to just hate the guy. It was easier to. He just sat there and transmuted his daughter and the dog. You're a villain. But deep inside, he wasn't. He was just broken. But I'm always open to conversation and disagreement in the comment section below. I'll be there to have a lovely talk with anybody willing to chat with me. Smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. We're almost monetized. Maybe you will be, well, maybe we will be when the video drops. You know, become a member of the channel if we are, though, because I will be doing special releases for the members of the channel, as well as you'll get early release dates for all the videos. And anytime there's a copyright issue, you'll still get to see the original version of the regular vids. Till next time, you guys stay safe.
Your theme is peace.